Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Sunday, 10:56. Pretty rainy, crappy day. Kind of a rainy, drizzly weekend. Pretty cold. Yesterday was somewhat decent, but it's been pretty crappy ever since. But at least it's kind of on the warmer side, and it is technically spring, so I hope everyone's doing good. It's always a good time to watch movies, regardless. So yeah. Again, lately what I've been doing with this channel, with just series of more recent shows, I've been doing lots of shows on revisiting all the classics that that I own that are part of the Mondo Macabro label, my favorite boutique label of all time. And I've been doing a bunch of shows on re-examining, re-watching those movies, and that's just been incredible. And typically, those movies are, when I think of the decades of when a lot of these super low budget films came out, most of them are in the 70s, 80s, and, some are in the 60s. There are, I'm sure, other films that have come out since, or maybe in the late 80s, or maybe in the 90s, but I don't really believe so. They pretty much specialize. It's pretty safe to say Mondo Macabro's titles, the movies, as far as the time that they were released, were like in the 70s, 80s, like for the most part. A lot of them from the early 70s. Probably the oldest one, or I would say, well, probably the most, um, geez, well, one that is a little bit out of their typical time frame of certain releases, like 86, 87, 88, late 80s. There's a German film called The Fan, which is extraordinary. I'm going to talk about that again. I've done one or two shows on that film before, and it's a masterpiece. But that, I believe that came out late 80s. So, but that's like one of the, as far as like more recent films, like I don't believe any of the other films that at least that I own, um, you know, uh, nothing in the 90s, definitely nothing in the 2000s that I've come across. It's always typically in those decades, which are my favorite, decades. So it's pretty awesome. But that all being said, and I've been, reviewing or rewatching a lot of those movies. A lot of them I'd only seen once, but it's been amazing. And but at the same time, I love to see new movies that are coming out and try to, keep my finger on the pulse of new things, new films, and what have you. I'm a firm believer in believing or thinking that there's still a lot of great films that come out. So I try to stay pretty contemporary. So I go I don't go as often as I used to. It's pretty sporadic, maybe once a month, a couple times a month, just because I have a ton of movies here that I own that I watch, and I do find it's pretty hard to find certain kinds of films. I've gone, and it's not a criticism, but it's a little bit frustrating sometimes because I go to OperaHouse Video, which is the local video shop, the only video shop in Maine. And I went in there a couple of weeks ago or last weekend looking for certain films that I didn't think were that obscure, but they didn't have any of them. And they didn't really have much as far as new releases. But I go there to mainly buy newer films. That's usually where I will stay up on new things that are coming out. And I typically, obviously always go, seek out horror films. And again, 2024 was an extraordinary year for movies in general, but especially when it comes to horror. And I bought a lot. From last year, I bought a handful of those films. In a Violent Nature, I bought that on Blu-ray. Long Legs, I bought that on Blu-ray. I also got Oddity on Blu-ray, extraordinary movie. Nosferatu, I just bought, masterpiece. And then I got Late Night with the Devil. So I got a lot of newer films fairly recently of movies I'd seen. And Nosferatu, I saw that twice in the theater, and then I saw it again recently after I bought it, and just such a great movie. So last year was this killer. This year I think is not very good. So far 2025 I think kind of sucks as far as new releases go. The one film I saw this year that I thought was really, really great was The Monkey by Osgood Perkins, who also directed Longlegs. And he directed another film which I haven't seen but I really want to see I think it's called The Black Coat's Daughter, and he has another film coming out as well. So he's great, and I really love The Monkey. It's super gory and just completely insane, and it's super funny, and it's a Stephen King based on a Stephen King story. So, but that was all last year, and I mean, sorry, The Monkey came out this year. That's the only movie I've seen this year in the theater. So yeah, I know there's going to be at some point good things coming out, but I've been really not loving 2025 as far as new releases after coming out of such an awesome year. But when I go to Opera House Video in Belfast, I typically will always, whenever I see new releases, new movies, and it doesn't strictly have to be horror films. I love, I love all kinds of movies. So I, will anything that a film that had heard about or looks interesting and what have you, usually is what I base it on. But typically when I go there, I seek out like newer releases or new releases. And that's kind of how I stay in check as far as kind of what's coming out. And if it's a film too, like a newer film, and I was kind of interested in seeing it in the theater, but then for whatever reason I wasn't able to see it. So that's usually what I do when I go there. And this past weekend I went to Opera House Video. I went on Saturday after I came back from the protest in Augusta, which was kind of amazing. So today's show, the next few videos are gonna be about all the movies I rented. Basically, I rented four movies. One movie out of the bunch is a movie that I definitely seen, and I've always been a big fan of it, but they had a really cool like edition of it with a lot of special features, and I hadn't seen it in years. And that is Clive Barker's Lord of Illusions. I just rented that on DVD. That's the only movie out of the four that I had seen before. So probably the next few videos coming your way, including today. Today would be the first one. Will be about new films I just saw that I rented at Opera House Video. So yeah, here we go. Typically what I do with this channel, like movies that I talk about, I try to only cover movies that I'm really fired up about, that I'm excited about. I try not to be, I try not to do too many negative kind of reviews, but I try to be critical, and try to be, thoughtful about what I'm going to say or what I'm going to present. The exception of that, where whenever I go to the theater and I see a movie, I will usually review it, do a show on it, regardless of whether it was good or not, just because of the experience itself. But for typically outside of that, I don't always do that. I do from time to time. So, but today's show is going to be the first movie I got, or that I rented at Opera House Video, is a film called The Last Beyond. Never heard of this film, and I looked at the cover, and it looked kind of interesting. It looked like like a cool kind of modern western, and it's not. I don't know. It's not quite that, but it is. If that makes any sense. And never heard of this film, but I thought it looked pretty interesting, and it came out in 2019. It had a lot of really great reviews for this film, and at face value, it looked like a kind of an interesting kind of modern western, and I'm a huge western fan. I've covered quite a few westerns on this channel. Huge John Ford fan, huge Sergio Leone fan, huge fan of Clint Eastwood, the Clint Eastwood films. So I'm all about westerns. I When I get into the zone of wanting to watch westerns, I go full on balls deep. And again, at face value, I was like, this looks like a cool kind of slow burn western, film. But it is, and it isn't. It was directed by Graham Dubois, who again I've never heard of before. It's an American movie. It's an English movie, and it came out surprisingly, which I didn't know until just a few minutes ago when I looked up some more info of this film. It came out in 2019, so it's kind of an old film by today's standards. Here we are in 2025, so it's weird, yeah, and that's happened to me before, where I'll see a lot of movies in this day and age come out, streaming or in some limited release, and by the time by the time they get put out, say on in a physical media format, it could be quite a few years. That's happened a lot. That's like a newer trend, and that just says a lot for, I think, that the industry itself is in a lot of pain. It's definitely hurting. But this film came out in 2019, not 2025 like I thought. But that doesn't really matter. I mean, and it was directed by Graham Dubois. And the basic premise of the story is a man embarks on a spiritual journey when the bank forecloses on his family's ranch in Depression era in Montana. So it takes place like during the time of the Depression, like the 20s, um, early 1900s, and it feels like a western, and for the most part, it is a western. The cinematography, well, I'll say some things that I thought were really, really great about this film, and then I'll get into things, reasons as to why I wasn't a big fan of this. At the end of the day, I wasn't really a fan of this film. But the cinematography is really gorgeous. There's a lot of beautiful kind of natural landscape shots of Montana. I do believe this film was shot in Montana. It's it feels, the feeling of when I started watching this movie was that this could be, a real classic, epic kind of a western film. It had traces of, like, when you see films like Open Range, some really great films directed by Kevin Costner. It had a little bit of that scope, or like John Ford. It had that really larger than life, as far as cinematography, where you really get a sense of the landscape, the terrain, the environment. So this film had some really great, beautiful cinematography in the beginning. It's it's definitely, well, you get this feeling that this is going to be a very slow burn film, and it is, but again, it's not. It's kind of interesting. But the thing I did not like about this film, the music is cool, and I thought the music was pretty cool. The cinematography, especially in the opening sequence of this movie, was pretty breathtaking. Definitely, there's some shots of some of the lead characters that we are slowly, well, we're not really slowly introduced to them, but so it starts off very interesting and very cool. But the thing that happens is there's no, like, we're introduced to the story and to the characters and what kind of the premise of the story is, where there's no kind of introduction to the characters. There's no build up. There's no delivery of how or why you should kind of care about these characters. You're just kind of thrust into the situation, and immediately the story is taking place. And like right away, like kind of the lead character, because of the this main character who's a rancher, his family is facing this foreclosure. The first scene is basically, the bank is at his ranch, and they're putting a sign. They're closing it. They're foreclosing it, and immediately a confrontation happens, and this lead character punches this guy who is sticking a sign, who works for the bank. He punches the guy right in the face, and then he's thrown into jail. And it's so the thing that I did not like about the way they kind of introduced the story was that there was literally no build up. There was no character development. I felt like you were just kind of thrown into a situation, and I honestly could not really get into the story, or could not get into having an empathy towards the characters, because I didn't know really anything about them. I didn't really care. There was no, even if there's like a little bit, and it doesn't have to be on some grand scale, but even if there's like a little bit of an introduction to who you're meeting on the screen, some kind of character development, and then the story can evolve, and then there's like that can evolve into the say the first chapter of the story, and then it's kind of you get the plot reveal of what this movie is about. This film just kind of strikes right away and direct, and I just feel like there's no slow trickle, or there's nothing to cling on to, at least from my perspective, as to like why I should care about these characters, or why should I spend time watching this film. It just felt like it was too quick, too soon, with no development as far as the way the screenplay was handled, and kind of the direction. And once it gets into the story, like again, immediately this lead character is in jail, and you get introduced to these other characters, and I just felt like once that gets going, and immediately that this guy is going to be screwed, and but you don't really. I found myself not really caring really at all about what he was going through. I had no empathy towards to the situation. The writing, I felt from that point, because now there's going to be more dialogue. You're introduced to these other characters. There's also a Native American guy who seems really young, who is also in jail, and you're introduced to this other character, and it just the writing, I feel at that point, gets really bad, and just really just so generic and predictable. And I could not make it all the way through. I just felt like, man, there's no hook, there's no hook, line, and sinker. No, and zero story, zero character development, and I just couldn't get into this film. And again, it started off with some very cool cinematography, which I thought was really beautiful. Obviously this director has a pretty good skill set on how to shoot a movie, working with a really good cinematographer, and it definitely creates the scope, and it's powerful. But I was lost. I could not get into this film. And the other thing that was really strange, that was kind of off-putting, is when you're kind of introduced to the very beginning of this film with these really beautiful, shots, panning shots of like the landscape of Montana. It's very beautiful, and it's very, you feel like you're being pulled into like a classic kind of John Ford film. But it has this film also, like, as the film kind of develops and goes along a little bit, it's I kind of get the sense that this film is incredibly, like, super uber low budget, and it feels, I don't know, it feels like an amateur film, if that makes any sense. For the kind of the story I feel like it's trying to tell and the scope of it, it feels like it's kind of done by these amateur filmmakers in this weird way. It's all shot on this like digital. It's all digitally shot. Well, I mean, most films now are digitally shot, obviously. But this looks like a, like it was shot. It feels like it was shot on like a, second or third edition kind of GoPro camera. It just has this really low budget quality. And again, I watch all day, all night. I watch trash movies. I love watching trash movies, and they're all fucking low budget and raggedy ass film. Shot in raggedy ass ways, and they're amazing. But I feel like in that world for those films, it totally works. Like it makes the experience even more exciting and fun. But in for this kind of film and what they're trying to go for, I just feel like it just really stands out, and it makes it feel like it's like, you know like it was shot by these kind of amateur filmmakers that couldn't get their product or their project financed. And I don't know, it's very weird. And the other thing is the editing for this movie is kind of terrible. It feels, and again, I did not make it all the way through this movie. I probably made it about 35 minutes into this film. I typically, for me, watching a movie, if I'm not really into a movie, because I watch a lot of movies, and so I am more than willing to give something a chance. Like, there's a lot of films out there of where, the film or a series of films that you're watching are incredibly slow, and maybe it takes forever for it to kind of kick in. And then I've had that experience where a film can be really, really slow, almost to the point of where it's kind of boring. But then maybe by the third act, you're like, everything just clicks and it makes sense. And then you're like, wow, okay, that was kind of a premeditated way of telling the story, and it makes sense. It has some balls to it. So, but typically if I'm having watching a film and I'm not really digging it, and we're maybe 45, maybe getting close to an hour in, and I'm really like not digging it for some glaring reasons, I will typically not finish it. I like to think I have a really big open mind and I'm willing to give things a chance. Sometimes, you put in a certain film and it might not be, you're in a different kind of mood. You're actually in the mood for something else. And so your mental space at that time can have an effect on it, and there's lots of variables. But generally that's what I do is if I'm watching a film and I'm not really feeling the love for it, usually at about that 35, 45, maybe an hour mark, I will exit stage left and put in a different movie. And I did that with this film, The Last Beyond. And again, what I was starting to say, the editing for this movie is not very good at all. It's all like, I don't know how to describe it. It kind of feels like the way the editing is kind of structured. It feels like it's like a real low grade TV movie. And again, I watch trash all the time, and it works 99% of the time for me in the exploitation genre. But this is a film that is not that kind of vibe at all. It's it's giving you the impression that this is a big kind of, classic kind of Western, larger than life kind of presentation. And the way it's shot for as little as it was shot, and then the editing makes it feel like it doesn't feel like that at all. And it does feel like this weird little like TV movie, and the editing is really just kind of piss poor because there's all these like little like once a scene completes and there's like some dialogue, it kind of fades out and then it goes into like the next chapter, and like every scene is kind of structured like that where it fades black and then you're coming to the next scene. There's no there's no like connective tissue from one to scene to the next. It establishes something, but because the editing I feel goes awry, it you're kind of taken out of that feeling, and then you're introduced to this next scene. There's no cohesiveness, and I think that's due to the really bad editing of this film. So yeah, it felt like an odd, you know, melodrama that was made for like the USA Network or ABC, like a movie from. I mean that doesn't exist now. I mean now we have streaming television shows, but I'm talking about when there was like cable. When there was the actual made for cable TV shows. You had NBC, NBC, ABC, and they made these, or the Lifetime Network, when they made these networks made their own television shows, and this feels like that. It feels like something that was done in the like maybe early '90s, back when that was still a thing. ABC or USA, Up All Night. It just has that weird vibe, and yeah, very off-putting. And so I didn't make it all the way through this movie. Yeah, so I don't recommend this movie. Again, there's some good attributes. The cinematography in the beginning is very, very cool. It has a really engaging kind of introduction to the story, with some great cinematography. But it just ultimately, I could not get into this film, and I took it out and I moved on to the next one. So if you see this movie around or hear about it, I will say to pass on it. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.